Hello friends, welcome to Trich Institute, and in today's Opensuse High Availability Cluster tutorial series, we'll be discussing about the fencing. What is the importance of fencing in cluster, or what all are the methods for fencing or type of fencing that we'll be seeing in today's episode. So before we start, if you have not subscribed yet to my channel, the Trich Institute, please subscribe to it and press the bell icon so that you get a notification about upcoming videos and you can watch them. So let's start the fencing. So fencing, what is fencing, right? First thing you will be thinking, right? So this is a solution for your split brain scenario in HA cluster. So if you have seen our previous episode where we were discussing about split brain scenarios, right? You know, in a cluster, this kind of scenario happens where cluster breaks into two or multiple parts, and each one of them thinks they are only alive, other part is not alive. So that called split brain scenario. And how you can avoid that or recover from that? For that, you need fencing. So the idea here is to put a fence around a subcluster. So when your cluster is getting broken into multiple parts, so fence will put a boundary on those sub clusters. And here the aim is to restrict the faulty nodes from accessing the resources. Let's say one node is not able to come up properly or not able to function properly. It can impact your cluster resource. So fencing will be restricting that node from accessing the resources and impacting your services. So this is a concept where your cluster requires a reliable implementation. So if you have fencing is not properly implemented, then your cluster will not be functioning properly. So what are the techniques for this fencing? There are two type of techniques are there. One is like where you'll be doing node fencing, where faulty node will be uh, fenced or stopped from accessing any resources. Whereas there is one more fencing called resource fencing, where you'll be fencing from accessing that resource which is not implemented or used in Suse or Opensuse high availability cluster. Now, how you'll know what all are the good techniques for fencing? So fencing is performed. First thing you need to keep in mind, this is performed without the cooperation of the node or nodes. Let's say one of your cluster node is hanged due to high CPU usage, so it will not be able to respond back. So in that scenario, you need to fence it from outside without the cooperation of the node. So that you need to keep in mind. Also, a good fencing method or something is that which will give you a confirmation that is successfully fenced the node or resources, and that is better than relying on the node to fence themselves who is not able to communicate, right? How you will get the confirmation that node itself, let's say, is network down, so you don't know, right? Or it will not be able to reply back to the cluster like, okay, it is fenced by itself. So you should have something from outside that can give you a confirmation that you it fenced the node properly. And one more thing, always keep in mind, if you are going for any kind of HA solution, keeping any single point of failure is not as wise. So same goes for your fencing also. So if you have one fencing device, that is a single point of failure. So always try to have more than one fencing device. So if one fencing mechanism fails, so you have another fencing mechanism in place to fence the faulty nodes. So let's see why that is uh, required, or why fencing is required, right? So this is an example. So you can see from this diagram, like I have a three node cluster where I have two network, one public network via which these nodes are accessible to the outside world or end user, whereas I have internal networks or private network that is used as a cluster network, so that cluster nodes can communicate with each other, send the heartbeats to each other to make them aware that other node or that node is alive and functioning properly. Now in an event where one of the node, let's say third node internal network is faulty. So now here what happens, as soon as that network is not reachable for third node will be separated from other two nodes. Now in this situation what happens, other two nodes thinks that node 3 is not functioning properly, it is down because it is not able to reach to that, is not receiving any heartbeat. Whereas node 3 that is still up, only the network is down, so it will think like other two nodes like node 1 and node 2 is not alive, they are not sending any heartbeat to node 3. So in this scenario what happens, node 3 thinks it is only alive in the cluster, so it will try to take over all the resources, whereas node 1 node 2 they thinks like node 3 is not alive, so it tries to take over the resources running on node 3 to this node 1 and node 2, right? So in this scenario who will be fence, right? Or how you will decide whom to fence? So for that you have the answer that is called quorum. So what this quorum does, so as you already saw the problem where there are two partitions in the cluster trying to fence each other but unable to communicate, right? So node 1, node 2 is not able to communicate with node 3, whereas node 3 is not able to communicate with node 1 and node 2. So there are two partitions in your cluster. Now, here what is the end goal? One of the partition to be able to successfully fence the other partition. It should not be both are fencing each other. Then your cluster will fail, your resources will be all will be down. So that is not the goal. So how you will decide whom to keep and whom to fence? That math is very simple. You need to select the partition who has more than half of the nodes in it as the partition to continue. So if you remember the diagram previous where I have two partition, one partition has only third node whereas other partition has one and node 2. So it has clearly more than half members available in this partition. So the winner is node 1 node 2 partition, it will fence node 3, right? But this is okay for your 3 node 4 node 5 node cluster. But think about if you have a two node cluster. So in that case, you will have equal partition, both will be having on the single node. So it is not more than 50%. So in that scenario, your cluster option is there, no quorum policy ignored. So this policy comes into rescuing two node cluster. So actually what happens when that two node cluster happens, the quorum will give its vote. So it will be staying with one of the partition. Now as your quorum is presenting one vote, so that will get added to one partition. So now that partition will have two votes. So that is more than 50%. So that will succeed and then other partition will be fenced. So whoever has the quorum, it will survive. Other partition will get fenced. So what is the next for this? You understand what is split brain, you understand what is fencing mechanism. Now the next thing you need to understand that is stone it and various fencing methods. So how actually this fencing happens, so that we'll be discussing in our upcoming next video. So if you subscribed and press the bell icon already, you will get the notification as soon as we publish that video. So thank you, thanks for your time. We will see you in our next video. Thanks again. Keep watching Trich Tech Institute.